Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today we're going to be doing a look through and sort of a first impressions of the Tomb of Annihilation, the latest adventure from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This is not going to be a comprehensive review. I picked this product up last night, so I've only had it in my possession for a few hours. So basically what I want to do is just kind of, like I said, flip through it a little bit and give my early thoughts on it. I had a chance to go through it a little bit over the last couple of hours, but again, nothing overly comprehensive. So right now it's just sort of how I feel about it from having just picked it up. And I'm hoping to have the full review available as of next week. So it will be interesting to see how things change between my initial thoughts and the full review. So without further ado, we'll just have a look here. So this is the front cover with Acerak. And just on the back you see more of the big green devil face. That's one of the iconic things from the Tomb of Horrors, if anybody ever played through the original one of those. And the marketing blurb on the back just says, "Welcome to the jungle. A death curse has befallen everyone who's been raised from the dead. Its victims are rotting away and all efforts to reverse the decay have failed. The souls of the dead are being stolen one by one and trapped inside a necromantic artifact. Only its destruction will free the trapped spirits and allow the dead to raise once more. All paths lead to Cholt, the mysterious land of volcanoes, jungles, and ruins of fallen empires. Below them all awaits a deadly tomb. The trap is set. Will you take the bait?" So this is an adventure for characters level 1 through 11. Got the Tomb of Annihilation mark on there. Now, 1 through 11, I still don't really like that level range, unfortunately. I just find that it's a little bit too low, especially considering that, one of the most powerful glitches in all of Dungeons & Dragons history is, behind everything that's going on here. Now, just on the inside, we have the disclaimer. And it reads, "This adventure will make your players hate you. The kind of simmering hatred that eats away at their souls until all that remains are dark little spheres of annihilation where their hearts used to be. P.S. Don't forget to tear out the character sheet." So I thought that was pretty cool. I've always liked those disclaimers, and that one in particular struck me as pretty funny. One of the things that I found interesting right off the bat is the foreword really talks in large part about trying to add humor into this module, and it's interesting. And I've watched Chris Perkins run things like Acquisitions Incorporated, and he's done an amazing job of incorporating humor, and I do agree that humor is certainly a part of the Dungeons & Dragons game, but it's just interesting that such a somber storyline, or something that sounds like it should be really somber, with any resurrected individual being slowly drained of their life, and everything that's going on. It's interesting that they spend so much of the foreword talking about trying to make things funny, when this is really a potentially very serious storyline. Now, I think the reason that they kind of go through that is simply to have it feel a bit more lighthearted, especially if you use like the meat grinder rules to make things even more deadly and dangerous. So inside here, we also have our just table of contents. So the first few chapters seem to be, or the first couple of chapters at least, seem to be dedicated to just providing information for the land of Cholt itself. So one of the things that I actually really like about this, and actually, sorry, one last thing here before I get to that, this actually has a list of the important NPCs that you're going to encounter throughout the adventure, or potentially throughout the adventure. And what's really cool is that it even gives a way to pronounce their names, which can always be difficult with fantasy names. So yeah, I really like the fact that a lot of the early sections of the book are dedicated to just fleshing out the land of Cholt itself. And I think ultimately what this book is going to probably be most useful for is just having another setting for you to run adventures in. The adventure itself, I'm sure, is fine, that's contained within, but having this sort of regional information is one of, in my opinion, the bigger selling points. Now, what's also interesting is there's information here for starting the campaign at higher levels. So you can start the player characters off at 5th or 9th level. and just the guidelines for doing that. So if you start them at 5th level, they'll still find some of the aspects challenging, but it's not going to be necessarily as difficult as it would be for first level characters. It doesn't really get you to change a whole lot though, which I find interesting. The only thing it says, you can introduce enemy reinforcements, and that you don't give any XP awards until and level advancement until the characters reach Omu in Chapter 3, which is, I guess, one of the locations. There's also for starting at 9th level. So it just basically says that they'll steamroll through the initial chapters, spend less time on encounters in the jungle, and steer them towards Amu as quickly as possible. Once they arrive, run the adventure as you normally would. Characters at this level will still be challenged by chapters 3 and 4, particularly if you play the Auntie as intelligent adversaries. Hold off on XP awards and level advancement until the characters enter the Tomb of the Nine Gods in chapter 5, which I believe the Tomb of the Nine Gods is the Tomb of Annihilation itself. So here we have, again, just some of the information here. So we've got chapter 1 is Port Nyanzaru, and just gives you some, basically it looks like some side quests that you can do, which is pretty cool. Goes over their information. The basic premise and plot behind the characters entering Chult in the first place, if I can find it. Yeah, it's all just summed up in the starting the adventure, and just the player characters are essentially just kind of tasked with going there to Chult to destroy the item or the evil artifact that's causing this death curse, which I guess it's being referred to as. And I think even in the opening flavor text, I want to say it mentions the actual... Okay, no, maybe not. I didn't know if it mentioned the soulmonger right away. So, oh wait, no, here we go. Yeah, so right from the very beginning, it's already known what's causing this. So you got like the soulmonger. That information can be provided right away to the characters. So I almost would have liked, that's one thing I will say right now, just as sort of like a first impression, I would have liked to have seen them not give that information right away, and just have the player characters, sent to Chult and spend the early levels, like, if they go as first level characters, have them spend like levels 1 through 3 or 1 through 4, just piecing together clues that reveals the fact that an artifact, known as a soulmonger exists, and that's what's responsible. I think I would have liked that a little bit more, but again, I haven't had a chance to read through everything thoroughly. So it may very well address that better than I expected. So I'm not going to hold too much against it at this point in time. I just think, again, it's something, it's kind of interesting that they give away that information potentially right at the very beginning. Also, with the level range of 1 through 11, what I find difficult is for first level characters, why would first level characters be sent to investigate this, death curse? The only thing I could think of is that, they would be pretty well guaranteed to have never been resurrected, so they would be immune, but I think that it probably would have been better served starting as like a 3rd or 5th level adventure, maybe going up to, 15th, I think would still be a good locate or a good level range to run through. So like 5 through 15 with some levels 1 through 4 stuff that they could do, if necessary. So we're just going to kind of flip through and just see some of the artwork here, and the artwork's been pretty excellent in most of these products so far. So there's quite a few different locations for the characters to visit and explore before they get into the adventure proper. So the first couple of chapters just give them sort of that background stuff that they can do, the side quests and things of that nature. And but I think where we really get into the main campaign or the main adventure itself is when you get into the Dwellers of the Forbidden City. So if anybody watched the most recent Acquisitions Incorporated video, then the following map may look a little familiar, because they actually had this produced on their tabletop. So there's the amphitheater there where they had their airship. And so this is, I guess, essentially where the main adventure really begins. Now, in addition to just going through and facing off against the unique creatures that are in Chult, one thing I did read is that agents of Zastam, the ruler of Thay and commander of the Red Wizards, has sent some of his minions to Chult to find out what's causing this death curse, because one of the interesting things is that it affects even liches, who normally their soul, once they're destroyed, retreats to their phylactery. And because of this soulmonger artifact, the curse even extends to them. So if a lich is defeated, their soul is actually absorbed into this apparatus. So it's interesting that you can interact with the Red Wizards of Thay, and essentially you're looking to do the same thing. You're looking to accomplish the same goals. Okay, and just kind of flip through a little bit more. So the Tomb of the Nine Gods, I believe, is the main Tomb of Annihilation, where most of the bad stuff takes place. And again, like I said, I'll do a more thorough, definitely do a more thorough review in the weeks to come, or actually probably within the week here. But like I said, just wanted to flip through and show off some of the really, fantastic artwork. There's a classic four-armed gargoyle that's been a part of the Tomb of Horrors again for quite some time, going back all the way back to first edition AD&D. And there you see some creatures crawling out of one of the devil faces. The green devil face it's called now. I don't think... I'm interested to see if this particular adventure actually has a green devil face with a sphere of annihilation in it, because that'd be kind of a cool throwback. I did see mention of a sphere of annihilation towards the end. But anyway, so basically the overall premise is that once you get into the tomb itself, you explore through and try to find the soulmonger, and this is the soulmonger. So it's just this artifact here. This horrible-looking creature is known as an atropal, and an atropal is basically an abandoned creation by evil gods that was never actually given life. So it's pretty horrid. And the adventure, I do know that the adventure concludes when you destroy the soulmonger. Now, you don't necessarily have to destroy the atropal, but if you do destroy the atropal, then bad things can potentially happen. So, essentially, the main point of the campaign isn't to confront Acerak; it's just to destroy the soulmonger. And once that's done, it's considered to be, mission complete. However, if the characters kill the atropal, then Acerak actually does make his appearance and will fight the characters, at least until he's dropped down to below 100 hit points, in which case he, departs and plans his revenge at that point. If the characters are able to defeat him, then his soul will retreat to his phylactery, because essentially, the soulmonger would have been destroyed at this point. And the sad thing is that if the characters do end up killing him, it basically says that Acerak won't bother trying to get revenge and will just let the characters, die naturally. So I think that's a little bit anticlimactic, and that's probably going to, I think, be my biggest complaint, is for as much as Acerak has been, involved in the presentation and the marketing and everything else that's, gone on with the Tomb of Annihilation, he plays actually a very, very small role directly. And, there is a very strong potential that the characters may never actually encounter him. And even if they do, and they're able to overcome him, there's a strong possibility that they'll never actually end up seeing him again, or he'll never actually end up being a threat later on in the campaign, which again I don't like. I just feel like it's missing an opportunity to make Acerak the main villain of this campaign, whereas he's someone that you may fight, and even if you manage to defeat him, then that's it. Even though you should know that defeating a lich without destroying his phylactery first doesn't mean the end. But we do have Acerak's stat block here, and it's interesting that there's no images of him in the adventure itself beyond what's on the front cover. So I would have actually liked to have seen, some more artwork for him. But what's interesting about him is, in addition to just being a powerful spellcaster, he can actually cast up to third level spells at will. So cantrips first, second, and third level spells he can do unlimited number of times. And one of his legendary actions is to actually cast one of his at will spells as one of his actions. So it's like he could be a really deadly spellcaster. So it's kind of cool that they did that with him instead of just making him more like the standard ordinary lich. The fact that he's so ancient and so powerful that he can command those lower level spells unlimited times. I actually like that. I think that's pretty cool. In addition, there's some interesting character or creatures in here. Like we got the albino dwarves that live in the jungle because they were driven out of their subterranean lands. You also have the character of Artis Climber, this guy here, and he is interesting because he possesses an item that essentially makes him immune to the effects of aging, so he just doesn't age. And there's a plot thread involving him trying to get the item. It's called the Ring of Winter, that keeps him basically immortal. He can still die in combat and stuff like that, but he has no aging or no natural lifespan as long as he has that ring on. So there is a side quest or a plot thread to try to get that ring from him. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that develops. Then we got the Atropal again, and challenge 13 for that. And it brings back things like the Bodak, which is pretty cool. You've got the dinosaurs and stuff like that. That's always interesting and kind of cool. Then you got the grungs, the frog people, so they're represented once again. Petrofolk, some Yuan-ti, the Tabaxi, so there's cat people, Vegapygmies, yellow musk, creepers, and zombies, Yuan-ti Broodguard, and the Zorbo, which is actually, kind of adorable, even though they're somewhat ferocious, but that's still pretty cool. And just some artwork in the back here. Now, towards the back we have our handouts, and one of the things I actually think is really cool is the player's handout has all these hexes that are blank. And the reason for that is the territory inland has been very rarely explored, and very few people that have gone deep into it have actually survived. So it's kind of interesting if you can copy this and hand it out to your players, and they can actually fill in details themselves as they explore. So if you want to do that, that's actually something that would be pretty interesting, having the option to explore and map out the land of Chult, because everything that's normally explored is just within a few miles of the coast. So it's pretty cool. And now one of the biggest things that I really like about this is it has a map. I haven't taken the map out yet. I'll have that probably visible in my full review, but they finally included a poster map, something that you can fold out and show for your players to use or for yourself to use, which is, again, something I think is actually really cool. Another interesting aspect of the adventure is the ability to be possessed by the old gods of Omu. So I guess it's just an ancient civilization that used to inhabit that region, and their gods can essentially take over or possess the player characters, and doing so gives them new flaws and new powers. So actually that's something I think is kind of interesting. So for example, some of them look like they're pretty beneficial. So we've got Onkir, and his symbol is a flail snail, which they brought back in this adventure, which is super cool because it's just basically a big giant snail with multiple tentacles, where its head should be, and it's pretty cool. But his power is that it increases your constitution to 23, which is something that I think is pretty neat. I actually like some of these, and if you're possessed by one of these spirits, if you do confront Acerec, then you get extra benefits. So I think they gain 50 temporary hit points each round, and I want to say that they deal extra damage to Acerec. I think it's radiant damage that they deal to him. So that's, anyway, it's just sort of my flip through. So at a glance, I think there's a lot of potential for this adventure to do some really cool stuff. I like the idea of the plot having resurrected individuals slowly having their life force drained from them, having the magic like to resurrect or raise be ineffective is something that I think is kind of interesting. I think there's a lot of potential to it, and exploring Chult could really be a campaign in of itself, which again is something else that I think is really great. As a first look through, one of the strengths, again, there's role-playing potential to strike in an alliance with, the Red Wizards, which would be something that's usually pretty unlikely, but, you can strike an alliance with them. However, they don't want to destroy the Soulmonger, they just want to take it for their own. So you would come into conflict with them if you manage to work with them all the way up to that. Then it would become an issue once it comes time to destroy it. But again, that can also make for an interesting encounter. I like the idea of just having the information on Chult itself, as well as the different things that the characters can do, including the the dinosaur races. So you can actually ride on a dinosaur and you can race it, and you can bet on races. You can race them yourself. It's just there's just a lot of really cool flavor that I find in this. The only real downsides that I see so far is just the level range doesn't seem to fit the epic scope of what the adventure is. I don't see the logic in sending first level characters to a mysterious unknown land to try to do something as important as destroy this soulmonger that's sucking the souls of anyone that's ever been resurrected. So I just don't think that the level range works. And then having it say that you can start with like 5th or even 9th level characters and still run the same adventure relatively unchanged. I just think that this is something that should have been a higher level adventure. I think it should have started with a minimum of 5th level, where the characters would have earned a reputation enough on their own that someone would seek them out for a task as important as this. So just, again, first level characters, it just doesn't really make sense unless you start them in Chult. But I would have liked to have seen levels 5 through 15. I think would have been perfect. I'm also a little bit disappointed that Acerec is not necessarily going to be the final encounter, the main villain that the player characters confront in the adventure. I really would have liked him to have been more directly involved that way. I mean, this is basically one of his schemes that he does and then disappears, and he only comes back if the characters destroy the Atropal. So if they destroy the Soulmonger, essentially they can get away with it scot-free. And while destroying the relic is a callback to old school D&D adventures, it still would have been nice to have had Acerec, really be present and try to protect the Soulmonger and not allow the player characters to destroy it. And a confrontation with him would have made, for what I consider to be a much more memorable climax to the adventure. Now, again, you may still face him, but it's not guaranteed. And it would have been interesting if this would have been, for example, the first part of a 2-part story arc, which was something that they did back with Hoard of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. I would have been okay with that, and maybe they'll still do that, I don't know. But at this point in time, it just feels like Acerec's not as directly involved as he really should be for something like this. So those are kind of my criticisms at this point, but again, I haven't read the adventure in full. I haven't had a chance to really sit down with this thoroughly. So those opinions very well may change. This is just my early impressions. There's a lot of cool stuff. There's a lot of cool potential. I like the idea of having sort of the blank map that the player characters can fill in if they so choose. And I think there's a lot of potential with Chult to make some interesting campaigns and stories. Ultimately, I still think that the biggest use for this book is going to be that information on Chult. And I think that's going to be sort of like the legacy of this adventure. I think the adventure itself is interesting, at least from what I've seen so far, but I still think that the information on Chult kind of outweighs the adventure itself in terms of overall usefulness. And again, hopefully I'm wrong on that. We'll see how that goes. I do kind of like the idea of the meat grinder rules as well, although really the only thing that seems to be part of the meat grinder rules is that your death saving throws are made against DC 15 instead of 10. So I mean, that's still pretty deadly. I'm not going to argue that that's not potentially going to cause quite a few deaths, because it very well may, and it seems very likely that that's going to be something that's going to just destroy people. But I think that's basically the only thing. is that, it's the DC 15. So it would have been interesting if it was something like, you don't regain as many of your hit dice back with each long rest, or you don't regain full hit points after a long rest, and you have to spend your hit dice and you regain the hit dice. So I think there were things that I would probably modify to make the Meat Grinder adventure feel a little more meat grindery. Because just having the death saving throw is bad, but there are other things you could do to make it feel more old school. So like I said, I would probably do something where you don't regain your hit points at the end of a rest or a long rest. You get your hit dice back, and you have to spend those to heal. But anyway, again, this is just all initial stuff. So if any of you guys have this book and you've had a chance to read through it, let me know what your thoughts are. And again, keep in mind, I'm looking to have a more comprehensive review uploaded within probably the next 4 or 5 days. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this sort of flip through and initial thoughts, and we'll see you next time with the full review.